that will help ensure that through technology, we can take them to market? How can we ensure that there is access to finance? I mean, Emeka was talking about the good work that Afrexim and ADB and all the likes are doing. But you know, most of the credit you give to the banks end up going to those that are already prepared. How do we ensure that we guarantee MSMEs? For instance, agriculture is done well because of the work that Accra have done in trying to guarantee some of the things they do in agri. Are we going to make sure we guarantee our MSMEs so much so that they will have access to finance, and just as you say, you can take off this credit from those who are not performing, we can take them from MSMEs. So a number of work we've done is being we revised our company and allied law to ensure now that MSMEs can have access to regulations and easy access. And we're talking to our tax people to ensure that they are not too hard on MSMEs. And I do understand where you have huge debts on your hand and you are borrowing to fund, the tendency is for you to clamp down on small and medium scale entrepreneurs, telecom people, how much of tax you can get. And when you look to the development partners, the international agencies, they will tell you, oh, tax in Africa is too low, tax people the more, and you realize that you are taxing those small institutions that are doing well. The question is, how do you ensure that you allow them first to grow before you begin to tax them? I'm the first to admit that a lot of our regulatory agencies that are supposed to be facilitating business are not facilitating business. And so they just show how do we facilitate these businesses and help them to grow them more? This will be my initial.
Thank you. Excellent point. And I know we have about 10 minutes to go and I have a lot of more questions, but I do want to leave some time for the audience to ask questions. Maybe for each of you, just a very brief answer, like a 1-minute answer. Like what would be the number one piece of advice that you would give companies here in the room about doing business in Africa? So Laoye, maybe stay with you.
My number one advice is please improve on your risk perception of Africa. Each time we go to borrow money, people look at us and say, oh, risk premium, risk perception, too high. And I'm sure before some of you came to Africa, you must have heard a lot about Africa. And now you're here, you're ready, oh, it's not as risky as it is. Please do not reduce your risk perception. We're trying to improve on our competitiveness and the environment for doing business, but it's two ways. So when you reduce your risk perception, and I'm happy that Afrexim and the like are ready to even to guarantee some of those risks, then you can do business with us because it's the future of the world. The side of the continent of the world is the future of the world. Secondly, is help us to ensure we build capacity, especially around the technical vocational education. It will make us very competitive. Thank you.
Okay, so perception and knowledge. Salomo, what's your advice?
Well, my advice would be that we should, as part of this conversation, really push for a uniform currency as well. Because a uniform currency will go a long way in dealing with some of the swift costs that we just spoke about earlier in the morning, because it will eliminate some of the cost structures that we have in intra-trade on the continent.
Yes, thank you. There was the number one question that was asked the Secretary General Mine in South Africa, and he said it was going to take some time, but they're working on it. So,
yeah. I think really that's that. And then the other thing, perhaps, we should look at the continent in terms of where we are and not copy and paste whatever solutions we have read about wherever. Because we've got very peculiar problems, and subsequently the solution should be able to be tailored to speak to them in that manner, as opposed to a blanket approach where we think it has worked somewhere, so it will definitely work in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Fish.
So similar to what my co-panelists have said, I think it's important to keep an open mind when you're in Africa. The risk really is not as bad, as high as you might imagine if you just listen to people generally, or you just read stuff online, etc. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks everywhere. And I think the opportunity far outweighs the risk. But you just need to do your homework. And as I said earlier, you separate the theory from the practical. And if you actually work on what's practical, there are many, many ways of making a successful business venture in Africa.
Absolutely, and there's also a matter of opportunity cost. And I think, as Royal Highness said this morning, this is the oyster and the shell question. Absolutely. So, Emeka, I know what your number one advice will be, which is come and do business with a Frexim bank, but maybe there's something else.
Well, naturally, yes, but that is actually the end point. You have to have the business to finance before we can assist you. So my advice is, like was said in the morning, ignore Africa at your own peril. My advice is sit down, study the AFCFTA agreement, and develop an African strategy, and a patient one at that. Because that free trade agreement has everything you need to do business in Africa successfully. For the first time, it's a set of legal frameworks, transparent, predictable, of doing business. There are protocols on competition, on trading goods, trading services, and doing business is not only goods, services, the creatives. There are protocols on intellectual property right that protects your patents. There is a dispute settlement body that can sit on cases. You don't need to go sit for 10 years in commercial courts. There are protocols on women and youth. You know, there's a protocol on digital trade. Study that agreement and develop a business strategy for Africa. And if you did that, you won't get it wrong. And then secondly, find a trustworthy partner to deal business in Africa, because it's also so difficult to just come in on your own. If you establish business in Africa today, based on the preferentials available to African enterprises, on the elimination of duties, the agreement has been in place for 2 years. So about 84% of tariff lines have already been dropped by 40%. So if you produce and sell within Africa, you're already much more competitive than international businesses who are selling into Africa, who are paying the full duty. So even if you have a little bit more expensive running and operating costs based on energy or lack of infrastructure, the advantage you get by the reduction in duties, which could go to zero depending on your sector in 5 years, far way at, gives you a lot more competitive advantage than making overseas and selling into Africa. But if you don't produce locally, you don't get to benefit because of the rules of origin requirements. So set up a strategy and look for a trustworthy partner and set up, operational basis in Africa. That would be my number one advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're exactly at 4:15, but I will allow for about a few questions. So if there's questions in the audience, please state your name, affiliation, and we can maybe bundle 2 or 3 questions and then have the panel answer. Please, sir. Help is on the way.
Oh, it's working. I figured it out.
From Delaware, right?
That's right, that's right. Mohammed Sisse, I came with World Trade Center, Delaware. I am a business consultant. I work in the US with small and medium-sized companies, with Exim Bank America proudly to help them access the African market. I have 2.5 questions.
There's 3 questions allowed, so
that's why
someone's going to have half a question.
Ivory Coast and Ghana combined produce 63% of the world demands in cocoa bean. The quality control and inspection of those commodities are largely done by SGS and Bureau Veritas. Exim Bank, back in January 5th of this year, 2023, announced a $100 million investment in a facility, quality control facility that's going to be, I believe, co-run with Bureau Veritas. I'm wondering, if we are trying to grow the African market, how many local laboratories have you helped acquire either ISO 17025 or the FDA accreditation in order for them to be able to do inspection for the American market? That's my question number one.
You have 30 seconds more.
Yes, I understand. Thank you so much. My question number two, I'm going to make a comparison, but it's just an ambitious comparison, not a realistic comparison. From Maine to Florida in the United States, I can drive 2,000 miles on I-95 with only one traffic light. That is a strategic tool to help grow free trade zone or free trade agreement. At what point will I be available or capable of driving with my merchandise from Ghana straight to Ivory Coast without being stopped at a multiple point? The half question, I'm going to keep it for after panel.
Well, thank you. Any other questions? I can call out someone. I was speaking to some companies this morning. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Gigi. I'm with Denver World Trade Center. Thank you, the moderator and presenters. My question is, I will make it short, to Africa Import-Export Bank. What are the most three important sectors you have given a loan so far? How far do you work, on giving loans? Is it plain, with no bribe, with no interference, and with no some other issues? If you can tell that. Number two, the interest rate in Africa is very high. You guys were talking interest rate. So I would like to ask, since I came here in Ghana, I asked, how much is the interest rate to develop, real estate or, establish a factory? Especially real estate, it is a double digit. That is what I heard, So people, they cannot afford it. What do you advise? Why is the reason it is too high? I heard, 30, 40%. I don't know if it is true. 20%. How can you bring it down to help people, to invest in Africa, like in real estate sector and other sectors? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ma'am, last question.
My name is Maeve Abelson, and I'm from Ghana. My question is, there has been an overriding concern for startups accessing funds to grow their businesses. And then the gap to get innovative minds in a common space to increase productivity. Now to Afro-Exim Bank, how can you stand in for a private institution who is ready to employ entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurs, because they can promote innovative products and marketing so that we can increase productivity and also access funds and then access potential investors? Because most of the investors coming in here, they are already interested in investing in adolescent businesses, whereas the startups have been left out. So if someone has a brighter concept to bring this talent under one space, can you stand in for us to access funds?
Great, thank you, and excellent questions. I think, Emeka, a lot of it was sort of directed to Afro-Exim Bank, so I'll let you handle.
In fact, the entire questions I wish the moderator gave me enough time to make my presentations, because these answers are all there. Let me start with the lady, first. She talked about support for startups, right? One of my co-panelists talked about the misconception that you can access all sorts of financing from banks. Different types of financial institutions are set up to fund different types of businesses. Afrexim Bank, given our nature and our mandate, unfortunately cannot finance startups because there are other financial institutions that can do that business. I mentioned that we don't intervene when there are people doing the business already. But granted, startups are not getting enough support, but there are supports there. But what we have done to indirectly speak to that, two things. Afrexim Bank, I mentioned, will have just 6 physical presence in the whole of Africa. As large as Africa is, 1.2 billion people. So we have a head office in Cairo. But we have relationships with more than 500 African financial institutions that we provide funding on on-lending basis to support their local clients, because they are better placed to support local clients, including startups, than we can from Cairo, for instance. So that's one. Secondly, we also noticed that there are some specialist finance startups that will not have the kind of leverage and history that typically banks look to appraise credit. 3 years operating, profitability, audited accounts. Startups like tech industry. Somebody can stay in his room and write a program, and tomorrow he has a larger valuation than a bank that's been in business for 10 years. So we set up what we call the Funds for Export Development, FEDA for short, and it's headquartered in Kigali, Rwanda, as an equity support business. Because Afrexim Bank's direct mandate cannot invest in startups and in equity, but we have set up another institution, 100% subsidiary of the bank, that can support startups, that can provide equity to businesses who are looking to leverage on the equity to access more debt financing. Because that's also another hindrance we noticed, that some businesses have done well and are ready to scale, but they are not able to raise sufficient debt financing to support the scaling. So we support them by injecting equity, and then they can even come to the bank and borrow debt, or so other financial institutions that we are supporting as well to assess debts. I'll go to the other question on the gentleman from the United States on quality assurance and inspections, right? Again, Afrexim Bank has seen that problem, because part of what also hinders intra-African trade is unacceptability of the goods. Standards are not harmonized, so the products in Ghana, even though it can meet local standards, are not able to meet standards in Nigeria or in any other country. So what we have done, we are working with ASO, the African Standard Organization, to harmonize standards of products in Africa. And we are giving them grants and capacitating them to quickly do this, because under the AFCFTA, one of the key components of that trade agreement is unified standard for all the products in Africa. And the organization that stands for that is ASO. And we are funding them and encouraging them and working with them to harmonize those standards across board. But we didn't stop at that. We are now also developing what we call Africa Quality Assurance Centers. There's going to be one in each of the 5 regions of Africa. The pilot project was commissioned in December last year in Nigeria, and it's operational. It does testing, it does certification, and it does inspection. With that running, we'll begin to eliminate what we just identified. There are others that are built to be built in Tanzania, Egypt, and 2 other countries I can't remember now. So Afrexim Bank is already 100% funding the building of these certification centers, because you can't export cross-boundary if the standards don't conform. So while we are waiting to unify, we're also helping test, inspect, and advise. Why are you able to drive all the way in the United States, but you're not able to do that in Africa? That's because of different rules, different regulations across country. Again, Afrexim Bank, working with the African AFCFTA Secretariat, we have come up with what we call the African Transit Guarantee Scheme. What happens now, there are 16 landlocked countries in Africa that don't have ports, so they import from countries that have ports. And at every border, because if you're passing through and a good is not made for the market, you have to get customs bond to show that you're not going to have dumping. So the countries will insist that you post a bond as you're entering their country, and when you're passing to another country at the next border, you also have to buy bond locally. If you're passing through 5 countries, you have to stop at the borders and get 5 different bonds. Some in different languages is crippling. Every day you spend at the border costs about $450 extra on a truckload of goods. So Afreximbank, given our continental mandate, and given that we are owned by all these countries, we have now, working with the Secretary, come up with a single customs bond that is guaranteed by the bank. So you purchase that bond at your point of entry, and you use it and travel everywhere in Africa. So you can go from Cape Town to Cairo with just one custom bond, and you're able to drive through. You can go from Mombasa in Kenya to Dakar in Senegal with just one customs bond. So that is only possible because of a bank like Afreximbank that has a continental mandate and that can take the risk of all these countries because it's owned by this country. A commercial bank will not be able to do it. So we already have that solution, and it was part of my presentation, the single transit bond. The next question was about 3 sectors that we prioritize. We work very closely with the Secretariat, and the Secretariat had retained the services of McKinsey and did a complete value chain mapping of Africa. And of course, different countries produce different things, but there were 4 priority sectors that were identified by the Secretariat. Not that they are the most important, but you have to start somewhere. And these are automotive, agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, and of course, transport and logistics. If you want to trade in goods, no matter the sector, you have to move it from point A to point B. So Afreximbank is working again to introducing an e-logistics utility, that will have all the providers of logistics come together on a digital platform. So you, the customer, you are agnostic who is providing what. All you need to achieve is move your goods from one country to the other. Again, there has to be an institution that can unify all this. And we have also come up with an auto finance strategy that the bank has committed $1 billion to support. And you ask why auto? It doesn't seem to be the most important thing. But like we heard this morning, India, that's like Africa, produces 5 million vehicles. Africa will produce 600. So Afreximbank again has put up a $1 billion facility to support anybody who wants to do business in the automotive sector. And auto is specifically important because an average car has about 30,000 different parts. All those 30,000 different parts can have 30,000 suppliers. So we're not looking at just the assembly. You don't have to have car assemblies in every country, but if you have it in one, you can have parts suppliers in 5 countries. You can begin to grow rubber in the average agricultural value chain and process it into rubber, right, to support tires.
Mr. Emeka, this is Big Brother. Where it's got to,
let's
I need to intervene. In June, you return here to celebrate 30 years of being the Trade Finance Bank for Africa, boosting intra-Africa trade. If you say everything here, what will you say then? And I'll be the same person here for you. So I beg you in all the names of God, let's load some of our ammunition. Please, a round of applause for him. Let's just reserve some of our ammunition. Robin, you have 2 minutes to end the panel.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to our excellent panelists. Please, another round of applause for our wonderful panelists.
Robin, I thought you would conclude your last words. You have 2 minutes.
More questions for the panelists, but 1 minute each, please. So, thank you for that extra time. I appreciate that.
It's 55 seconds now.
Very, very briefly. So this morning, I had a chance to speak with Secretary General Mine, and I was also asking him, what is it that we can continue to do? And he said, bring the money, bring the investments to Africa. So what is it, 1 minute each, please. What do we need to do? What can we do to bring more investors, more businesses to Africa to look for opportunity? 1 minute.
Oh, I thought this was rhetorical.
No, I'll keep to 1 minute this time around. Okay. First of all, one of those protocols I talked about under the AFCFTA, one of them is investment protocol that has set out the framework, legal framework for attracting investments and to make sure your investments are protected. So that is there, legal framework. The second thing you need to do is to visit the Intra-African Trade Fair in November. That is the biggest platform for bringing investments into the continent. Like I said, we had 42 billion 2 years ago. We are aiming for 43 plus this year. That is huge.
Thank you. Vish?
Thank you. Excellent. Fish?
Well, related to that, I think it's about those of us in Africa telling our story more forcefully and more frequently, because we know the opportunities, we see the opportunities. Yes, there are challenges, but there are challenges everywhere, and we know how to overcome those challenges. So I think it's about promoting ourselves a lot better.
Thank you. Salomo?
No, thank you. I think for me, really, and speaking on behalf of Namibia, for instance, I think that we've got a very strong regulatory framework in which we find ourselves. Our investment climate is very healthy, and I think that we've got a certain level of policy certainty in terms of what the Honorable Minister spoke about, the ability to expropriate or expatriate your money out of the country with ease. That exists in the Namibian economic environment or investment climate. But I really think that this opportunity has brought to fore an element of people really taking notice of Namibia. I think we really need to be a bit more on the map. We need to put ourselves a bit more out there to be able to attract the necessary investment, and I think that's something we really need to work on going forward.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And Laurie, last but not least.
Africa don't need AIDS. What we need is trade. If you grow our trade by 1%, we'll do close to $80 million. So please help us speak about the narration, talk about the image of Africa, that they don't need AIDS. Let's go do business with them. And let's take this risk with them, and we'll make a better nation.
Thank you very much for lending us your mental agility.
I have more questions.
No more questions, I beg you. For now, let's have you at the front for a group photograph. Please, a round of applause for them. They've done a yeoman's job. Humbly, I invite our convener to please join them. Your Royal Majesty, together with our board chair and the Honorable Lucia Lipumbu, Minister of Industrialization and Trade, Namibia, humbly. When I was young, I encountered 3 insurance salesmen who changed my whole mindset about insurance, for which I decided to undertake that in the first part of my life. The first one told the clients that their company pays claims the fastest. Somebody died on a Monday, by Saturday they were at the home with a check. The second one said, let's also tell a story. So somebody died on a Wednesday, on the Saturday they were at his home with a check. The third one completely outsmarted, thought to himself and said, no, I must be very innovative. So he looked at both of them and looked at the clients and said, you know what, for us, some of our clients who work in our building are contractors. While they were working up, we heard a name constantly, Kwesi, 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 be careful, Kwesi, be careful. So we instructed the claims team to write the name Kwesi and write an amount by it. Once somebody slipped and the person was about falling, they threw the check out of the window, the person landed on the floor, the check landed on his chest, and behold, it was Kwesi. He turned, looked at the woman and said, in our company, we don't lie. We do our best for our clients. This is exactly what we've done today as WTC Ghana, and I believe WTC Africa. We've given you very compelling reasons why Africa is the new frontier. I believe by now you are convinced that the future is right here in Africa. Please give yourselves a round of applause. I have a few announcements. We have a QR code to gauge the sentiments across this room through a survey. Could we please have the QR code? Additionally, let me make these other announcements. For our B2B attendees, if you're planning on taking B2B meetings tomorrow here at the Kempinski, you're welcome to do so in our AfriExim deal room located outside the ballroom to the left. Lunch will be provided to those with a voucher at the Papillon on the 2nd floor. I think it's the third floor, as a matter of fact, you should have received a voucher with your badge. For our WTCA members, you will meet back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the member plenary. Tonight's networking reception will take place here in the ballroom. We'll see you all back here at 6:30. Until that time, ladies and gentlemen, it falls to our convener, our cherished host, who is Togbi Afede the 14th, to close us. A round of applause for His Royal Majesty.
How much time do I have? Our board chairman, Mr. John Drew, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you all very sincerely for tolerance and your endurance. We've gone a little bit past the time that we have asked for. But of course, the truth of the matter is that it's difficult to tell the story of Africa in one day. And you realize that our friend, Mr. Emeka, needed so much more time. Let me thank you also for what has turned out to be a very great, productive, and memorable day. I believe over the past few hours, we've been able to do justice to the theme that has brought us all here today towards African economic integration and enhanced global presence. Our speakers have all spoken to this theme, and so has all our panelists spoken to the theme. This theme is very, very consistent with the essence of the World Trade Association and also the very essence of AFTA. As our chairman explained earlier today, our vision is to enhance world trade and investment as a way of enhancing world prosperity, standards of living, incomes, with the ultimate objective being the enhancement of world peace and stability. That is the raison d'etre of the World Trade Center Association. For we as Africans, and therefore through AFTA, our objective is to enhance our economic integration, because we see in that a path towards enhancing prosperity in Africa, because we believe that an important stumbling block to our development is the fact that we are so fragmented. So instead of very little countries, tiny countries, sometimes maybe not very viable, we want to see how we can profit from our collective strength. And as someone explained earlier today, it's never a zero-sum game. I believe cooperation, integration, will produce for us the 1 + 1 = 3 effect, which is why we all must support it as Africans. Again, there is that congruence between the goals of the World Trade Center Association and those of AFTA, and therefore the African continent. We heard from the Vice President today what the Ghana government has been doing to bring prosperity to our country. It is consistent with what the other governments of Africa are doing and what we are doing collectively through the AU and, of course, Afrexim Bank, AFTA, and etc. And we heard from Secretary General of AFTA how these objectives are attainable. He explained to us the gaps that are there that suggest that indeed there's a lot that we can achieve in Africa. We heard about the fact that we have about 60% of arable but uncultivated land of the world, which means that we virtually hold a key to ensuring world food security, and we should never really be dependent upon the rest of the world for our food. The world should depend upon us for food security. We also have heard about the fact that we have about 30% of all known mineral resources of this world, again, which means that it's quite a paradox that we command only about 3% of global GDP and about 2% of world trade. Again, it shows how much possibility there is in Africa. Sorry, 18% or thereabout of world's population, juxtaposed against 3% GDP, 2% share of world trade. Again, just shows that there is just so much that Africa can achieve. And these are reasons for a lot of optimism about what Africa can mean to the world. Africa holds so much promise and should help, move the whole world forward. Our panelists, the first panelist, the second panelist, all gave us reason to believe that there are possibilities. And the important thing to take away is that indeed Africa is a land of tremendous opportunity. But let's remember also what I said earlier when I gave the welcome address. Africa can be very addictive. Africa can steal your heart. And it's for those who love natural beauty. We have so much to offer. Maybe I'm a slave to optimism, but I truly believe that the risk of investing in Africa are so much less than they are perceived. And it is because of that risk that has kept people away, that has made Africa even more attractive and more promising to those who try to dare. And that is why the marginal returns to capital are highest in Africa. That's why we have banks that have been here for more than 100 years. I brought in a company a few years ago to venture into the power sector of Ghana as the first independent power producer. They came in to produce 200 megawatts of thermal power. They quickly increased to 560 megawatts. And they're now embarking on extra investments to add 600 megawatts. That is the promise of Africa. That is what we are inviting you all to embrace. And that is why somebody said, you ignore Africa at your own risk. Let me thank you all once again for making today's event very memorable, very productive, very successful. But let me also remind you about the words of Andrew Carnegie. The first man shall grab the oyster, the last man shall grab the shell. I don't think any one of us wants to be left with a shell. Let's all go for the oyster. It requires, among others, less risk aversion. But very importantly, a factor in reducing your risk perception is to get good partners. A good partner can, lead you on a path that makes things easy. So I hope before you leave Ghana, you would have gotten good partners to work with. We have brought the whole of Africa here. Don't forget our friends from Namibia are here, represented at the highest levels in investment decision making. Our friends from South Africa are here. Our friends from Nigeria are here. And various African embassies are represented in what we are doing over the next few days. Once again, thank you all for making today a very memorable one. I wish you all well as we work together in exploring what Africa offers to all of us. Thank you very much. I'm told my work is not done yet. Our distinguished chairman, Mr. John Drew, with your kind permission, may I declare today's activities closed. Thank you. All those in favor? All those against? Overwhelming.
Our gracious host, the Executive Chairman of the World Trade Center, Accra, and a board member of the WTCA. Please put your hands together for Togya for the 14. Thank you very much for your great wisdom and insight. And so networking cocktail begins at 6:30. We shall have some very light conversations, light but very enlightening, on the future of Africa's extractive industries, opportunities and threats. Where should Africa look for power to finance its growth agenda, financing the public infrastructure and affordable housing deficit in Africa? It promises to be very engaging because we shall have a lot of Namibian beer and beef to make it all the more engaging. Ladies and gentlemen, above all else, I wish you faith to see the impossible, faith to believe the impossible, but most importantly, faith to trust the unknown. My name is Jerry Ajololo, and this has been a labor of love. I wish to see you again on Wednesday. From me and the team, we say goodbye for now. We'll see you at 6:30. Six o'clock, please. Not 6:30. 6 o'clock. Yes, please, right here. I ask that we quickly make our way out of the hall. We need to reconfigure the setting. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that we please make our way out of the room. Quickly, we need to reconfigure this setting to make way for tonight's engagement. Let's please make our way out. Thank you very much.